I want you to take a second and just imagine your absolute dream vacation.
Oh, I'm already there.
Right. Maybe you're picturing a pristine white sand beach, a quiet mountain village tucked away in the Alps, or maybe a bustling historic city center filled with ancient architecture.
Sounds incredible.
It does, but now I want to add a layer to that fantasy. Have you ever been to a place, maybe somewhere heavily touristed like Venice or Kyoto, and despite how beautiful it is, you get the sinking feeling that your mere presence is kind of a burden?
Oh, yeah. Like you're just adding to the problem.
Exactly. You're dodging crowds, you see the strain on the local infrastructure, and you realize you're just one tiny cog in this massive machine that is slowly, wearing the destination down.
It's a very common feeling these days.
Oh, yeah. And usually when we think about being a quote-unquote good tourist in those situations, the goal is just damage control, right? We try to minimize our footprint. We dutifully reuse our hotel towels. We make sure not to litter.
Right. The whole philosophy is basically just doing less harm.
But what if you could flip that entire concept on its head? Imagine a vacation where your visit actually heals and improves the destination.
Wow.
Where the beach is physically cleaner, the local culture is financially stronger, and the ecosystem is more vibrant, specifically because you went there.
I mean, it sounds incredibly idyllic, almost utopian when you put it like that.
It really does.
But what is fascinating here is that this isn't just wishful thinking anymore. It's actually the core of a very real, very urgent shift happening right now in how researchers and industry leaders are viewing global travel.
And that is the exact mission of today's deep dive into our source material. We are unpacking this really comprehensive academic paper published in 2026 out of Murdoch University.
Authored by Janeth Itawala and Diane Lee.
Right, Itawala and Lee. And what they've done here is seriously impressive. They took over 250 different articles and studies to finally pin down and define this massive buzzword that's sweeping the travel industry.
Regenerative tourism.
Yes, regenerative tourism.
And the timing of this research is really the key context here. If we look back a few years, the COVID-19 pandemic was just an absolute wake-up call for global travel.
Oh, totally. Everything just halted.
Exactly. It exposed the massive structural vulnerabilities in the business-as-usual model of tourism. When the world abruptly stopped, destinations that relied entirely on foreign visitors realized just how fragile their economic and ecological systems were.
It was devastating for them.
It was. And that shock to the system triggered a frantic search for a new paradigm, which led to a huge spike in academic research starting around 2020.
So our goal today is to map out what this concept of regenerative tourism actually looks like on the ground, and how it's attempting to move far beyond what we traditionally think of as just sustainability.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this because that is the perfect place to start. A massive portion of this paper challenges a word we have all been taught to revere for the last couple of decades.
Sustainability.
Yeah. Why is sustainability suddenly the old news? Why isn't it good enough anymore?
Well, the literature reflects a lot of tension around that exact question. When the researchers analyzed all these studies, they found that 36% of the academic literature specifically argues that we have to move beyond sustainable tourism.
Wait, really? Over a third of the papers are saying we need to drop it?
Yes. The core argument is that sustainability, as a functional concept in tourism, has hit a threshold. It's basically fundamentally broken in its current application because it operates on a flawed premise.
Let's pause on that for a second because honestly, sustainable still sounds pretty good to most people. When I buy sustainable coffee or, book a sustainable eco-lodge, I feel like I'm doing the right thing.
Sure, you feel like you're doing the right thing because you are participating in a system designed to maintain the status quo.
Okay.
But the research points out that traditional sustainability usually relies on top-down, heavily compartmentalized interventions. It focuses on managing an environment to keep it exactly as it is rather than enhancing it.
Give me an example of that.
Well, think of a coral reef that is 50% dead from over-tourism. A sustainable approach merely aims to keep it 50% dead.
Oh, wow.
Right? It prevents further decline, but it doesn't heal the damage already done.
I never thought of it that way.
And furthermore, the paper highlights a major critique. Sustainability has been heavily co-opted. It's frequently used as a marketing checklist to justify continuous economic growth at the absolute expense of the socio-cultural and environmental realities on the ground.
So it's basically greenwashing.
Exactly. The underlying extractive nature of the tourism remains unchanged. It just gets a green label slapped on it.
So to use an analogy, if traditional tourism is like a mining operation where you just extract value until the gold is gone and the mountain is hollowed out, sustainable tourism is just deciding to mine a little slower so the gold lasts for your grandkids.
That's a great way to put it.
But regenerative tourism is more like a community garden. You are actively tending the soil, planting new seeds, and making sure it yields more life year after year.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy perfectly captures the shift. It represents a profound paradigm change from a mechanistic view of the world to an ecological view.
Mechanistic versus ecological.
Yes. The mechanistic view treats a destination like a machine made of separate parts that we can exploit and manage. But the ecological view sees it as a living web.
Right.
So sustainable tourism's ultimate ceiling is doing less harm. Regenerative tourism's baseline is doing more good.
I see the appeal of the community garden idea, definitely. But I have to push back a little here on the reality of the industry.
Okay, go for it.
Is this really a genuine evolution, or is this just the latest trendy rebrand? Because if sustainability got co-opted by corporate marketing to sell more tours, what stops regenerative from becoming the exact same empty buzzword next year?
That is a highly valid skepticism. And the paper actually wrestles with that risk.
Good.
The defense against it becoming a buzzword lies in the actual mechanics of how regenerative tourism is defined. It requires two massive conceptual shifts that are, frankly, incredibly difficult to fake.
What are they?
First, it requires possessing an ecological worldview, which the researchers found emphasized in 71% of the literature. And second, it requires the provable creation of net positive effects, which showed up in 51% of the studies.
Let's break down that ecological worldview, because that sounds a bit abstract. What does that actually look like for a tourism board or like a major hotel operator trying to build a new resort?
Practically, it means they can no longer treat tourism as a standalone industry that just happens to exist on top of a location. They have to treat tourism as a living system that is completely inseparable from nature.
Okay, so it's all connected.
Right. The ultimate goal shifts to delivering a measurable, positive impact across what is called the triple bottom line:
The triple bottom line.
social, environmental, and economic.
So instead of just looking at quarterly profits, the single bottom line, they have to equally weigh how much the local culture thrived and how much the local ecosystem improved.
Correct. The focus is entirely on restoring, renewing, and flourishing. It is not about managing a slow decline. But achieving this requires accepting a reality that is very uncomfortable for modern business.
Which is?
Humans are not the center of the universe.
Wait, that is where my mind gets stuck. You are talking about global tourism here.
Yes.
This is an industry entirely built on pampering human beings. It caters to human comfort, human entertainment, human desires. If I'm paying $500 a night for a luxury beach villa, I expect the ocean view, I expect the pristine sand, and I expect room service.
Of course you do. That's what you've been taught to expect.
Right. So how do you convince an industry built on that level of entitlement that human well-being isn't the top priority?
Well, it is arguably the ultimate hurdle. And the research openly acknowledges that this requires a vast, incredibly difficult mindset shift. It requires respecting what the authors call nature's rules.
Nature's rules.
In a purely regenerative model, human well-being simply cannot supersede non-human well-being. To use your luxury villa example, if building that room with a perfect ocean view requires tearing out a mangrove forest that protects the coastline from erosion and houses local fisheries.
And then the forest stays.
Exactly. The human comfort gained does not outweigh the ecological life lost. The resort simply doesn't get built there.
But the tourists hold the purse strings. I mean, if a resort tells a wealthy tourist they can't have the oceanfront view because of a mangrove forest, that tourist will just go to a different country that will give them what they want. How does a business survive that economic reality?
They survive it by targeting a different kind of tourist, which points to a dual responsibility within this model.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning, yes, on the supply side, stakeholders like the hotels and tour operators must actively regenerate the place. But the tourists themselves have to change too.
So I can't just lounge by the pool complaining about the wifey.
Right. In a regenerative system, you are no longer allowed to be a passive consumer of a destination. You are an active participant.
Oh, I like that.
The draw of the destination isn't just mindless pampering. It is the opportunity to co-create an experience that leaves the place better while gaining a transformative educational experience for yourself.
So the bet is that there's a growing market of travelers who want that deeper connection more than they want a sterilized, destructive luxury experience,
Exactly. That is the fundamental bet.
which implies a total rebalancing of power. If we are all participating in this localized living system that heals a destination, the obvious next question is who actually gets to design and control this system?
And that leads directly to the human element required to make regenerative tourism work.
Because historically, it's a bunch of foreign investors sitting in a boardroom thousands of miles away, drawing up blueprints for a beach they've only seen in photographs.
Right, which is exactly what has to stop. The research shows incredible consensus here. The authors reveal that community centrism is the single most widely advocated concept across all the literature they analyzed. 86% of the papers highlighted it.
86%, that's massive.
It is. Regenerative tourism unequivocally demands a bottom-up approach. The local community has to be at the absolute helm of decision-making.
The framework in the paper makes a really crucial, almost poetic distinction here that I love. They emphasize that a place of living predates a tourism destination.
It is a vital distinction.
Uh,
Before a place was a hotspot for backpackers or a port for mega cruise ships, it was a home.
right.
It was a place of living with its own socio-ecological systems, its own cultural rhythms, its own specific needs. External stakeholders, the foreign developers, the international hotel chains must recognize their peripherality.
Their peripherality, so they aren't the main character anymore.
Exactly. They are guests in someone else's home, and the regenerative model demands they act accordingly.
And reading through the sources, it seems this framework relies heavily on indigenous values to guide that mindset. It feels like a return to older ways of thinking.
The literature strongly supports that connection. Regenerative tourism naturally draws on indigenous wisdom and traditional ecological knowledge.
Like what, specifically?
Well, the paper specifically highlights traditions from Maori cultures in New Zealand and indigenous practices in Fiji.
Oh, okay.
These traditions inherently emphasize communal land ownership, equitable wealth distribution, considering the well-being of all living things, and a deep focus on planetary health across generations.
Which is pretty much the exact opposite of the standard model.
Totally. It is a completely different starting point than the Western capitalist model, which is generally based on individual land ownership and infinite extraction for immediate profit.
So what does this all mean for the actual research? Because as I was going through these sources, I noticed a really glaring geographical irony.
Yes, the geographic gap.
Yeah. The concept leans so heavily on indigenous wisdom and the necessity of moving past colonial framings, but the paper explicitly points out that 65% of the single-country studies on regenerative tourism come from developed Western nations.
It's a huge issue.
We are talking about Australia, New Zealand, the U.S., and Italy. Meanwhile, there is a massive void of research coming out of developing nations in Africa, South America, or large parts of Asia.
You've hit on one of the most critical gaps identified in this entire body of research. The authors highlight this as a massive discrepancy.
It just feels so contradictory.
It does. You have the academic community theorizing about the value of decolonial approaches and indigenous wisdom, but the research pipeline itself is still highly centralized in the global north.
It almost sounds like a new version of the old problem.
The paper warns of exactly that risk. For regenerative tourism to actually succeed on a global scale, it cannot just be a Western academic exercise exported to the rest of the world.
Right.
The field must actively decolonize its own research methods. It has to validate historical wisdom and non-traditional, undocumented knowledge from emerging economies on their own terms.
And if they don't do that?
If it doesn't do that, the paper notes it risks becoming just another form of intellectual colonialism where Western academics dictate the quote-unquote right or most enlightened way to do tourism to the rest of the world without actually shifting the underlying power dynamics.
That is a fascinating tension to keep an eye on as this field develops. Okay, so we have this beautiful high-level philosophy. We need an ecological worldview, we need to focus on net positivity, and we need the local community firmly pulling the strings.
Correct.
But if I am a listener who just wants to plan a responsible trip, or maybe I'm a local restaurant owner in a tourist town trying to survive in a system like this without going bankrupt, I need to know how this operates day to day.
Absolutely.
How does this move from a university white paper into reality?
That brings us to how these systems are actually built, which the research identifies as meaningful multi-stakeholder collaboration.
Okay, meaningful multi-stakeholder collaboration. It sounds very academic.
It sounds like corporate jargon, I know, but the mechanism behind it is radical. It means completely dismantling traditional top-down corporate hierarchies.
So no more boardrooms dictating to the locals.
Right. Instead of a single mega resort dictating terms to a town, it is about creating distributed, networked systems. The paramount values become transparency, mutual learning, and reciprocity.
Okay.
It's about everyone in the system, the farmer, the hotel owner, the tour guide, the tourists, supporting each other to elevate the whole destination, rather than just competing to squeeze out the highest personal profit margin.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the source material actually provides specific real-world examples of businesses breaking the mold to do exactly this.
They do, and they're great examples.
Let's look at Timber Kitchen in Tasmania. They completely broke the corporate status quo. Instead of relying on a standard, rigid supply chain, they implemented a barter system with small-scale local suppliers and set up a family-style operational structure.
And if we look at the mechanism of why that matters, it shifts the relationship from being purely transactional to deeply relational.
Sorry, I mean, building on that, think about how a normal restaurant supply chain works. You have massive corporate distributors trucking in food from hundreds of miles away.
Right, which is terrible for the environment.
It is super carbon heavy, and the money you spend on your meal immediately leaves the community and goes to a corporate headquarters somewhere else. But by using a local barter system, Timber Kitchen cuts out that carbon footprint entirely.
It's brilliant.
They keep the resources strictly within their local community, which gives the small-scale farmers the financial stability they need to use better, more regenerative farming practices. It is a loop that feeds itself.
Another powerful example the paper highlights is Playa Viva in Mexico. When they wanted to develop their destination master plan, they didn't follow the standard industry playbook.
Right. The standard playbook is usually hiring an external architectural firm in New York or London to draw up blueprints, plot them on a map, and maybe hire a few locals to pour the concrete.
Exactly. Instead, Playa Viva mutually developed their entire plan with the village elders. The elders were at the planning table from day one.
Which changes everything about the physical footprint of the resort. If an elder points out that a specific stretch of coastline is a crucial turtle nesting ground, or, a vital watershed for the village's drinking water, the blueprints change.
The local knowledge takes priority.
Right. The intergenerational knowledge dictates the development, rather than the development bulldozing the history. And over in Spain, the paper mentions the Ferrancho operations. These are artisanal winemakers.
It's the Ferrancho operations.
They don't just rely on goodwill. They utilize dedicated, highly localized laws to strictly preserve their unique identity and traditions. The laws act as a shield, preventing them from being swallowed up, commercialized, or watered down by mass tourism demands.
What's fascinating here is that every single one of those examples, the barter system in Tasmania, the elder-led planning in Mexico, the legal shields in Spain, requires tourism practitioners to do something incredibly difficult.
What's that?
They have to completely abandon preconceived, templated best practices.
In other words, there's no franchise manual for regenerative tourism. You can't just take the Timber Kitchen barter model, copy-paste it into a beach town in Thailand, and expect it to automatically heal the ecosystem.
Precisely. It requires what the paper calls progressive harmonization.
Progressive harmonization.
When you translate that out of academic speak, it means maintaining fluid, evolving relationships that adapt to the highly unique, localized needs of a specific place over time.
So it's constantly changing.
Yes, it is deeply contextual. It is messy, it takes a long time to build trust, and it requires a level of humility that the traditional, fast-paced tourism industry is not generally known for. It requires listening far more than dictating.
Which brings all of these massive theoretical frameworks right down to our level, to you, the listener. Because this research isn't just a thought experiment for tourism boards or academics.
Not at all.
It fundamentally challenges how you view your role in the world the next time you pack a suitcase. It asks you to recognize your own agency.
The next time you travel, the mindset shift begins before you even book the ticket.
Exactly. When you step off that plane or train, you aren't just entering a destination that exists for your amusement or your Instagram feed. You are stepping into someone else's place of living.
Eric Gass.
You are entering their home, their delicate ecosystem, their complex community network. The challenge this paper presents to all of us is, how can your visit be a net positive? How can your presence there actively support that community and that ecosystem, rather than just being a financial transaction that extracts value, leaves a carbon footprint, and moved on?
And as we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final lingering question drawn directly from the ultimate conceptual framework presented in this paper.
Okay, let's hear it.
We talked a lot today about the net positivity matrix and the importance of bringing all these local stakeholders to the planning table. But the paper's matrix explicitly includes two groups in that living system that are incredibly difficult to account for.
Who are they?
First, uninvolved local communities. These are people who live in the destination but want absolutely nothing to do with tourism.
Oh, wow.
And second, non-living ecosystems.
Wait, okay, that complicates things.
It does. So as we rethink the future of global travel, ponder this. How do you practically give a voice at the planning table to a local resident whose only desire is to be left completely alone by tourists?
That's tough.
Or, even more profoundly, how do you design a system that gives a voice to a river, a mountain, or a coral reef that has no voice at all, but bears the absolute brunt of our human desire to explore?
That is a massive question to chew on. How do you design a system that advocates for the silent? We want to enthusiastically thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material today. We hope this exploration of regenerative tourism gives you a totally new lens for your own learning journey and maybe, inspires you to rethink what it means to be a truly great guest on your next vacation. Keep asking those big questions, and we will catch you next time.